Hi guys, Steve Dempster back, Dempster Guitar Studio with our second installment of the Where Stuff Comes From series. Just a very quick review here. Even though in the first issue I spent quite a bit of time focusing on getting you to recall, know, memorize, recognize this sound, which I think most people do intuitively for the most part, as the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, that sound. So get that into your mind, get the interval distances into your awareness really solidly. Don't be just familiar with this stuff, know it. Know it so well that you can't get it wrong, because from this point forward we're relying a lot on that knowing. If you're a bit only familiar with it, then stuff starts to still feel vague and perhaps a bit disconnected from one idea. So playing off of the knowledge you have of the major scale sound and the major scale interval formula, playing off of that, in the second issue I wanted to very quickly introduce you to the notion of what happens when you start the same process on any note other than C. Let me refresh your mind. It just turns out, we're not going to overcomplicate this. For you, it turns out that if you start on a C anywhere on your fretboard, move up and down that one string using the interval formula for the major scale, and what is it? Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. When you do that starting on a C note, all the subsequent notes that create the major scale sound are natural notes. They're just normal letters of the alphabet. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. For those of you with any keyboard, piano background, they're just the white keys of your piano, the natural notes. The black notes are the sharps and the flats. We don't benefit from that visual pattern on the fretboard, so we have to do some other things in our mind to help hold that stuff there. But C is the only one that has all the natural notes. You don't have to do anything, you just play the natural notes from C to do the scale, C major scale, and all is well. But what happens when you start somewhere else? For example, what if you decided to just start the process on the note G? Well, I'm not asking you to know where this note is, but I'm just picking one here on the first string. Sorry. Which I could have done on the sixth string as well, because you probably know that whatever you do on the sixth string, it mirrors itself on the first string. If you're not aware of that, congratulations. You just had another little epiphany about how the fretboard works. But I don't want to continually stay down on the low string, so I'm just going to go to a higher string. I'm going to start on G. And here's the thing, the question is how to build a G major scale, not the C, by applying my knowledge of the major scale interval formula, which is again tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, or in terms of frets, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So let's do that right now. I'm just going to grab this G, and then for the rest of my time moving up the fretboard as I do it, I'm actually not too concerned about what notes I'm hitting. I'm only concerned for this moment to get the interval distances correct. I want, from the G, I want a tone up. And you know that that's 2 frets, so that's a tone. Next, I need another tone, because I have the formula memorized. You've got to have this memorized. From that sound, another tone. From that sound, a semitone, or semitone. And then from that sound, a tone, and then another tone, and then another tone, and then finish it with a semitone. And if I stop talking and just play the thing through nice and smoothly, once again you're going to hear the sound of a major scale, albeit the pitch of it is higher than the pitch we did in the previous video. It's not important right now. So here it is, starting on G instead of C. Hopefully that sound is recognizable to you. Once you can do that and apply the formula confidently up and down the string, and again, go ahead and try to make some music with it. Just something, you know, give it some kind of musical structure at whatever level you possibly can. If you only keep it at the level of practicing a scale, most people kind of get bored with that. And certainly nobody's ever going to pay you to play a scale up and down. Not that you're interested in that, but should you be, you're not going to do that. People who are soloing using that scale are not playing a scale. They're using the notes and they're moving around those notes for our purpose in as musical a fashion as they can. It can include their licks that they know from that particular scale, if they know any. It can include knowledge of the notes that are in the scale, which it should include. It can include knowledge of the interval distances, which it should include. Lots of things can be happening all at once in one moment to enable somebody to pull off a solo. So you're thinking about it a bit, and yes, the idea ultimately of doing perhaps some soloing, if you wanted to do that, is to be able to pull it off without much thought. But of course, like anything, to do that, that requires a lot of practice. It doesn't just happen out of the blue because you're born with it, for most people. It happens apparently out of the blue because you worked really hard at it. That's the key you have to keep in mind here. Okay. So here's the sound once again. There's the two whole tones or tones. There's the tone, a tone, semitone, tone, tone, tone. I remember some urban myth story about a guy practicing a piano in an apartment below another tenant, and he kept on doing this. I'll just stay on this particular scale. Did it again. Repeated that over and over and over, and apparently the dude above him eventually decided just to run down, knock on his apartment door, run in to the piano and finish it with that note. That there's a tendency in that major scale as you come to the tail end, it feels like it's ending. It feels like there's a conclusion to it that not all scales have. So that's a good quality to be aware of. Listen to it as I play. You can almost predict it in your mind before I play it. That's a good thing to be aware of. That's musicianship starting to cultivate itself in your mind. So you're not just frets and strings and shapes and fingers, you're actually using your ears, which is your mind, and understanding tendencies that are occurring in music. Good thing to know. Okay, now we go back and actually go and understand how that scale was built. This time, however, I'm not going to play the notes according to the interval distance for a major scale. I got that part under control. But I am going to play the notes just as natural notes. In other words, I'm not going to be too concerned about, well, I'm not concerned about the interval formula for the major scale at all. I'm just going to the natural note. So if I play a G, hopefully you know that moving up the string, the next note in the alphabet will be an A, then B, and you already know these distances. You've memorized them previously. This is the key here. G to A is a tone, A to B is a tone, B to C is a tone, or semitone, sorry. C to D is a tone. D to E is a tone. E to F is a semitone. You know this. And then F to G is a tone. But if I play that out, as I just did, fluidly, without talking yet again, I want you to answer the question, does it sound like a major scale in its current form? That is, only playing natural notes, just like I did with the C major scale. Here's the sound of it. Okay. I hope your ear is saying, no, most of it sounds right. That all sounds like a major scale so far, but that's an E note. Once I get to F, it doesn't sound right, and then of course ending on G, sorry, it sounds okay. So once again, here's what we want it to sound like, because we're looking for a G major scale. So this, if you can see my, I'll hold it up here a bit more, if you see my fretboard location, resolving here. What I did earlier was this, resolving to the same note. So the point here is, if you only play the natural notes starting from any other note, you won't get a major scale. You just won't. It is a scale, it's another type of scale, and it has a name, and we can get into that later down the road, but it's not a major scale. So, if we just play the natural notes, E, F, G, I have to alter that F, move it up higher because it's not adhering to the scale formula, to the interval formula of a major scale. Most of this is, but that little moment isn't. Two tones there, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone. That's not the interval formula for a major scale. At this stage right here, it needs to be not a semitone followed by a tone. It has to be a tone followed by a semitone. And if I do that, and I look down at my fretboard, I realize that in order to do that tone followed by a semitone, I had to take the F note, that was the natural F note, and I had to move it up. I hope you can see that. I'm moving that F note up one fret and then playing it, because I need that full tone there, that tone, I don't need a semitone, and then finally resolve it to the G. So the question becomes, if that's E, E, F, G, what's the note in between the F and the G? Probably some of you are very comfortable with this already, but it turns out if we're taking the regular natural F note and raising it by one fret, the name of that note is called F sharp, and that's what you're doing when you're sharpening a note. You're taking any note and raising it in pitch by one fret, or one semitone, if you will. So now, if I play out the major scale of it, not just in terms of the interval formula, which I have memorized, I'm going to keep reiterating this, now I'm going to be naming the notes that make up that G major scale, and they are not G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But they are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. If you do that process for each and every note that's in our musical system, and there's 12 of them, then you get 12 different keys. That's a tough concept for some people to get their head around. All it means is, for our purpose right now, is that as we start creating major scales off of different notes, we will be forced to alter some of the notes within that scale in order that it adheres to that major scale interval formula. And when you alter those notes and they become whatever they're going to become, That cluster of altered notes is referred to as the key signature for the key that you're in. It's a clue, it's a statement usually at the beginning of a piece of music that tells you ahead of time. And again, your eyes get used to seeing this if you're a reader of music, but even if somebody's talking to you about playing in the key of G, you would want to have an awareness of the notes that exist in the key of G. And when somebody says, hey, we're going to play a tune in the key of G, the very first thing that should hit your brain cells is a G major scale. And if you follow the interval formula, you will have discovered that in order to create the sound of a G major scale, the F note in that scale had to be sharpened or raised by one semitone, and its name becomes F sharp. So therefore, in the key of G major, all Fs are sharp. This is the way we tend to talk. And either you know this when somebody says play in the key of G, or you don't. You might have a vague awareness of those ideas, but how it actually unfolds. And it's important that you be able to either play or visualize that scale, in this case the key of G, because that's going to inform you about the type of chords that belong in that key. Some of which you probably already play, but you're never thinking of it in the key of G. Okay? So in the second PDF, which I called Same Framing, Different House, the framing aspect in the PDF refers to the fact that no matter what major scale you're playing, they all have the same interval formula, the same framing, the guts. It's like every one of us, has the same kind of skeleton in us. Even though we look remarkably different on the outside, essentially our skeletons are all structurally the same. It's the same idea. No matter what major scale you play, no matter where you start it, to create the sound of it, you have to apply the interval formula to get it. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, or 2-2-1, 2-2-2-1. From there, then you may need to go retrace that and look carefully to see if any of the notes that you are playing are altered notes from an original natural note. And other than the key of C, you're going to experience that. And getting good at it is just practice. It's a rehearsed thing. But at a minimum, again, when somebody says we're going to jam in the key of G, you should know the G major scale. And ultimately, we'll go over this later in the series, you need to know the chords that belong in the key of G. And where do you think the chords are coming from? The whole series is called Where Stuff Comes From. So if we're talking about, oh, I got to memorize a whole bunch of chords now for the key of G, not really. I mean, it's not really memorizing. It's sort of structurally already there for you. You do need to know the major scale to get it started, and from that major scale we build the chords. And then from the chords we build chord progressions. And then from chord progressions we knit them together into verses and choruses and bridges, and etc., etc. And before you know it, you've either got a nice rock song or pop song or a full-out classical composition that takes 45 minutes to play through. Okay? So I used the analogy in the second PDF that the same framing idea is all about the interval formula, but I call the different keys that you can do. In our case, we started with the key of C, and then in this example moved to the key of G. It's a different house. It has a physically different look to it on the outside. In other words, some notes are sharpened. But the inside of it, the interval formula, stays the same. It's an important idea to get really comfortable with, and once again, an important idea to make music with. So, again, you take that new scale that you just learned, you become hyper aware of this new F sharp, and again, you can do this on any string as long as you start on a G. I can do it right here. I'll start on the third string open. G to A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E to F sharp, and then I end up at G at the 12th fret again. That's because I started with an open string. So if I did that and got really comfortable with it, you should start making music with it really quickly. Anything, I don't care. I mean, get yourself a drum machine, play to that, grab a backing track on YouTube in the key of G, and take your knowledge of a G major scale and start using notes that come from that scale. And be aware that in that particular key, anytime you're landing on an F note, you're supposed to make it a sharp sound. Otherwise, it won't be in the key of G. It's another scale. It's a different type of scale. Okay? So at the end of that particular PDF, I lay that out quite clearly, I hope, as we compare the C major scale structurally as a major sound to the wannabe G major scale, and make the changes that we had to make. And in this case, it was all about creating an F sharp note. And at that point, I just kind of let people hang, and left them in the dark about, well, what's F sharp all about? Well, we talk about that in the next video. So, the house is the key. That's the framing comparison I'm making. The overall key. So, I built a house in the key of C. But my neighbor, apparently a very wealthy neighbor according to the PDF, built a house in the key of G. Same sound, different pitch, same internal framing structure. How about, just to kind of push this a bit, what if I grab this note right here on the 5th string? That's a B flat. And I'm going to play a B flat major scale, just based on the interval formula. Listen to it. I'm not necessarily aware of the notes. Well, I am, but I'm saying you don't have to be. You can create the sound of it just with the formula. Then you go back and you go, okay, let's look at what we got. That's a B flat, obviously. Oh, that's a C. I remember that from earlier studies. D. And then I had to do this semitone. Oh, but usually I go from D to E, but I went 1 fret lower, so that must be not E, but some other kind of E. You get the thinking that's going on here. It's not difficult. And once you get it in one key, it's the same for all of them. That's the beauty of it. It's sort of scalable in a way. Okay, so the big picture for the second issue was all about giving you a little bit of an introduction to the notion of what key is all about, in the sense that what it should mean to you right now is, hey, if we're going to play in the key of A, not the key of C, in the key of A, an A major scale should come to mind in your brain. And for now, along one string. We are going to get to go across the strings eventually, like the patterns that you probably already know. But I think it's important to do this along one string so that you can see the relationship maintaining itself, the interval formula relationship maintaining itself everywhere we go. If that scale doesn't pop into your brain relatively quickly, then that needs to be practiced. If you're going to do a blues in B flat, the same thing kind of has to go on. If you're going to do a jazz piece in the key of E flat, the same thing has got to go on. If you're going to do a metal song in the key of D minor, the same thing is going to have to go on. Don't worry, we'll talk about minor keys later on. So we're trying to get that natural, normal thinking process underway for guitarists to be comfortable with. But you have to do it and work on it at an early stage at a level that kind of feels like it's not quite very musical. So once again, I encourage you, once you learn the idea and you can find the appropriate notes for the scale you're interested in, the major scale in our case, that you make music with it. Again, what I do these days, you can queue up a backing track on YouTube and jam out on it. And you know, it's not a game of right and wrong, it's a game of listen and apply. Listen to the sounds that you're confidently making from the scale and how they sound against the backing track. And there's a whole discussion we can have about that as well. So, where do keys come from? They come from essentially the major scale. Where did the major scale come from? It does come from nature, surprisingly enough, and I haven't talked about that yet, and I won't for a little while. But it does. So that's it for the second issue on where stuff comes from. The idea again, is we're connecting concepts across, you know, from one idea to the other, and as we accumulate more knowledge of these connections, the bigger picture of how music works becomes very simplified, all encased in one box. Think of it like this. You might have a whole host of wonderful tools to build stuff with, but they're all spread out around the house. What we're trying to do is gather those tools up, concepts, and bring them into your toolbox. And having done so, understand how one tool might relate to the other in terms of building things. When's the right time to use this tool versus that tool? There's a connection there, obviously. Okay, that's it for now. Steve Dempster, Dempster Guitar Studio. Issue 3 is coming up. Talk to you soon. Bye.